I was called a maid in the glass-enclosed hallway of the neonatal ICU while holding the life of a newborn that no one else could stabilize. If you've never felt the ground disappear beneath your feet while 50 people stare at you like disposable waste, you don't know what true humiliation is. I know. I felt every second of it burn my skin. Please subscribe to the channel because this story needs to be heard. It needs to reach every person who has ever been treated as invisible in a place where they saved lives every day. My name is Lucia Navarro. I'm 34 years old and have worked as a traveling neonatal nurse in the United States for 8 years. I came from rural Pennsylvania, graduated with honors, and built a solid career caring for the most fragile babies imaginable. I learned to hold tiny hands the size of my fingernail while parents crumbled beside me. I carry my own cracks, a divorce that left me broke, anxiety I manage with deep breathing before each shift, and this constant feeling of temporary status everywhere I go. Agency nurses have no roots. We arrive, save those in need, and leave before anyone learns our last name. No one saw my other obsession. While the other nurses left straight after their shifts, I was organizing clinical documentation, reviewing contracts, tracking every electronic consent as if my life depended on it. Every milliliter of surfactant recorded, every time stamped, every digital signature filed. On silent night shifts in the Brickell ICU in Miami, while monitors blinked in the dark, I built fail-safe systems because I learned early on that a traveling nurse's word is worthless against that of a powerful family. Paper counts, records count, irrefutable proof counts. The Alvarez family was already a familiar nightmare throughout the hospital. Diego Alvarez, the tycoon who decided everything with a nod. Carmen, his sister, who turned the hospital into her private meeting room. Valeria, the baby's mother, was sedated in the adult ICU after serious complications during childbirth, but alive, battling sepsis and hemorrhaging. The newborn, born extremely premature at 27 weeks, needed care they couldn't buy with money. He needed me. Carmen Alvarez arrived every day at 9 in the morning as if she owned the place. I watched her walk straight past reception, without signing the guest book, without washing her hands according to the mandatory protocol, without putting on a sterile gown. She simply walked in. The security guards lowered their heads. The permanent nurses looked away. I was new there, 3 weeks into my contract, so I didn't yet fully understand the extent of her power. I learned quickly. She would point at me and loudly ask the supervisor why they'd assigned a white agency nurse to her nephew, if there were no permanent staff available, if the hospital was cutting corners on the Alvarez family's health. I felt my stomach churn. I continued checking the baby's vital signs as if I hadn't heard anything. The first real microaggression happened on Tuesday. I was adjusting the mechanical ventilator, calibrating pressure and volume with surgical precision because that baby had lungs the size of walnuts and any mistake could collapse everything. Carmen entered the room, completely ignored me, and started talking to the pediatrician as if I were furniture. She said she wanted a second opinion from Miami Children's, that she didn't trust the current protocol, and that the family had the resources to bring specialists from Boston if necessary. The doctor explained that the plan was working, that the baby had stabilized over the last 12 hours precisely because of the intervention I had coordinated during the early hours. Carmen looked at me for the first time. She asked my name. When I answered Lucia Navarro, she repeated it slowly, as if testing the sound, and said she hoped I knew what I was doing because the family wouldn't tolerate mistakes. My hand shook imperceptibly as I wrote down the data. No one else noticed. I noticed. The second was worse. Diego appeared in the hallway on Thursday, surrounded by lawyers and assistants. He wanted to see his son, but was clearly terrified. He approached the incubator with stiff movements, wide eyes fixed on the tiny body connected to tubes and wires. I began explaining each piece of equipment, each medication, using simple language and the gentle tone I'd developed over years of calming desperate parents. I talked about the surfactant we administered to help his lungs expand, about the nutritional support through the central vein, about the positive signs we were seeing. He interrupted me mid-sentence. He said he'd rather hear explanations from the head physician, not the support team. The support team. As if I hadn't spent the entire night preventing that baby from dying. I felt something harden inside me. Not anger yet, something colder. Resolution. The third microaggression came from a place I hadn't expected. The supervisor called me into the conference room on Friday and said the family had requested a change of nurse. Nothing personal, she assured me. Just a preference for someone with more seniority, someone who was more familiar with the specific protocols of that hospital. I had 8 years of experience in the neonatal ICU. I had worked in 17 different hospitals. I knew protocols from coast to coast. But I was temporary, disposable, replaceable. I asked if there were any formal complaints about my work. She said no, that technically my performance was impeccable, but that they needed to maintain positive relationships with important donors. I understood perfectly. My professional value was worth less than the emotional comfort of a wealthy family. I didn't argue. I just asked when my last shift would be. She seemed relieved I wasn't causing any trouble. She said Monday would be my last day, that they'd already called a replacement. I thanked her for the opportunity and left the room with the absolute certainty that something was very wrong with this whole thing. Diego was too terrified. Carmen was too controlling. Valeria was too absent. And I, apparently, was bothering someone just by doing my job properly. It was Saturday night during my second-to-last shift that I found the document that changed everything. I was finalizing baby Alvarez's electronic documentation, recording every vital sign, every ventilator adjustment, every milliliter of medication. I had developed this obsessive habit of cross-referencing information between different systems, checking that everything matched perfectly. I opened the administrative portal to confirm that the pharmacy had approved the order for additional surfactant. We would need more doses within the next 72 hours. The screen loaded slowly. When it appeared, I felt my stomach drop. The request had been blocked, not denied for clinical reasons, administratively blocked by a family representative. I checked the time of the block. Wednesday, 17:14 p.m., exactly 43 minutes before Carmen arrived, complaining that the hospital wasn't providing adequate treatment, that they would have to seek outside resources, that there was neglect. My mind began to race. I opened another tab. I accessed the county's public court system. I typed in the baby's full name. A petition for emergency guardianship filed on Thursday at 9 a.m. appeared. I read each line with increasing attention. Carmen Alvarez requested provisional custody of her nephew, alleging the father's unfitness and serious health care risk. She presented as evidence the lack of essential medication, medical decisions not made, and the absence of a capable legal representative while the mother was incapacitated. She claimed Diego was in shock, incapable of making decisions, and that the baby was at risk under his care. The judge had granted an emergency hearing for the following Tuesday. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I returned to the hospital system. I retrieved the digital consent for the stabilization protocol we had implemented. Diego had signed electronically on Wednesday at 1:52 p.m., 25 minutes before the surfactant was blocked. 2 hours and 13 minutes before Carmen showed up complaining of treatment abandonment. I grabbed my phone with hands that were finally shaking. I took screenshots of every screen, every timestamp, every digital signature, every system log. I saved everything in 3 different places: my personal cloud, a USB drive I always carried, and an email to myself. I needed to understand the extent of this. I opened the hospital pharmacy's purchase history. The surfactant came from a specific supplier. I searched for the company name. 3 clicks later, I was looking at the corporate structure. Alvarez Medical Supplies, a subsidiary of the family business group. They supplied the hospital and had blocked their own supply. I felt something freeze inside me. It wasn't hot rage, it was cold, absolute clarity. I understood everything at once. Carmen wasn't protecting her nephew. She was building a legal case for custody. She was blocking medication she herself controlled. She was documenting flaws she herself created. She was accusing Diego of unfitness while sabotaging the treatment he had authorized. And when she obtained temporary guardianship, she would have complete control over medical decisions and access to the fortune that this baby represented as Diego's sole direct heir. Valeria was fighting for her life in the adult ICU. Diego was paralyzed by trauma. Carmen was playing chess while everyone thought she was just worrying. I looked at the incubator. The baby slept peacefully under the warm lights, oblivious to the fact that he was the centerpiece of a dispute over the family empire. His little lungs rose and fell in time with the rhythm I had adjusted with pinpoint precision. He trusted me even without knowing I existed. I made my decision then and there. I wasn't going to leave with my head down on Monday. I wasn't going to let that family destroy that baby for power and money. I would need a stage. I would need an audience. I would need rules that not even Carmen could break. And I knew exactly where to find all of them. There was something about me that no one at the hospital knew. 3 years ago, when I lost a patient because family interference blocked a necessary transfusion, I made a promise to myself. Never again would I stand by helplessly and watch money kill babies. I sought out 4 other traveling neonatal nurses who felt the same way. We pooled our meager savings for 18 months. We created a discreet endowment called the North Star Fund. It wasn't much, $67,000 in total, but we chose 3 hospitals in need of equipment and donated incubators, monitors, and infusion pumps. One of those hospitals was exactly where I was now. The donation agreement had a clause my lawyer friend had drafted. The donors were entitled to annual updates. They were given a 5-minute speaking slot at any hospital charity event to report on the impact of their donations. It seemed like a harmless bureaucratic clause. In reality, it was our guaranteed voice. I checked the events calendar. The hospital was hosting its annual fundraising gala that very weekend. Saturday night in Coral Gables. 200 guests, donors, doctors, administrators, local media. The Alvarez family would obviously be in attendance. I felt a smile form on my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who finally had a plan. But there were complications. My conscience began to weigh on me in ways I hadn't expected. I reviewed every decision in my mind all Sunday. Diego wasn't a clear villain. He was genuinely broken. He had signed every consent form we put in front of him. He showed up every day terrified. He tried to understand even when medical vocabulary completely overwhelmed him. I remembered his expression when he held his son's tiny hand for the first time through the incubator's openings. Pure terror mixed with love, so intense it hurt to see. He didn't deserve to be publicly humiliated. But he also couldn't see through his sister's game. He was blinded by his own pain. Valeria was another heartbreaking story. I accessed her medical records from the adult ICU. I read every entry, every complication. Postpartum sepsis, massive hemorrhage, hypovolemic shock, acute renal failure. She was 28 years old. She was fighting with a strength I'd only seen in warriors. The nursing notes described how she asked for the baby every time she woke up with minimal consciousness. How she cried when they said he was stable but she couldn't see him. How she begged not to be sedated again because she was afraid she'd never wake up. That woman was going through hell and didn't even know that in the meantime, her sister-in-law was planning to take her son away from her. I hesitated seriously on Monday morning. I arrived for my last shift thinking I might just let it go. Get paid. Go to the next hospital, next city, next temporary life. It was easier, safer. I had chronic anxiety precisely because I couldn't handle conflict well. My therapist always said I avoided confrontation to the point of self-destructiveness. I was standing there in front of the locker room mirror, staring at my weary reflection, when another nurse walked in. Melissa. I'd worked there for 15 years. She greeted me and said it was a shame I was leaving, that they'd finally found someone competent, that baby Alvarez owed his life to me. I asked what she meant. She explained that the night I arrived, before taking over the case, the baby was in imminent respiratory arrest. No one could stabilize him. I had gone in, assessed him in 90 seconds, adjusted 3 ventilator settings, and reversed the situation. She said I had a blessing. She left the locker room unaware that she had just given me exactly what I needed. Courage, because I realized something fundamental in that moment. I wasn't going to do it out of revenge. I was going to do it out of responsibility. That baby deserved a fair chance. Diego deserved to know the truth. Valeria deserved to wake up and find her son safe. And Carmen deserved to face consequences for the first time in her privileged life. Justice doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be inevitable. I began connecting dots that had previously seemed isolated. During my last ICU round, I quietly chatted with a pharmacist who had always been kind to me. I casually asked about the surfactant blockage. She sighed deeply and said her hands were tied. The order came from a high administrative level, directly linked to the supply contract with Alvarez Medical Supplies. When I questioned it, they said it was a temporary inventory adjustment. But she checked other hospitals in the network. All had surfactant available. Only baby Alvarez's order was blocked. She thought it was strange, but couldn't do anything about it. I thanked her and kept this confirmation. I observed Diego during the afternoon visit. He arrived alone this time, without lawyers, without assistance. He stood in front of the incubator for a full 20 minutes, just watching. I approached slowly and began explaining the improvements. Oxygen saturation was stable at 94%. Heart rate was regular. Body temperature was maintained without external intervention. He listened to me with a level of attention he hadn't shown before. He asked if his son would survive. I answered honestly. The next 72 hours were critical, but the signs were positive. He nodded and then said something that caught me off guard. He said Carmen was right about one thing. He truly didn't know how to make decisions. He was paralyzed. He was afraid of making the wrong choice and losing everything. I felt genuine compassion for him in that moment. But compassion doesn't change facts. Carmen appeared minutes later. The change in Diego's demeanor was instantaneous. He stiffened. His once soft gaze became distant. She began talking about Tuesday's hearing, about how it would be better for everyone, about how she would ensure the best care, the best doctors, without financial constraints. Diego just nodded mechanically. I observed the dynamic between them with renewed attention. It wasn't brotherly love. It was control disguised as protection. She touched his arm as she spoke, and he recoiled almost imperceptibly. Fear. He was afraid of his own sister. That told me everything I needed to know about years of manipulation I would never witness. I spent the rest of the shift organizing my file. I printed every document, every log, every timestamp. I organized it in perfect chronological order. Wednesday, 1:52 p.m. Diego signs digital consent form authorizing full stabilization protocol. Wednesday, 2:17 p.m. Administrative block on surfactant by the family's legal representative. Wednesday, 3:30 p.m. Carmen arrives at the hospital complaining of a lack of essential medication. Thursday, 9:03 a.m. Petition for emergency relief filed alleging careless care. The timeline told a story no judge could ignore. I remembered a similar case I'd seen 2 years ago in Boston. A wealthy family was fighting for custody of a child through documented medical sabotage. The social worker who uncovered the scheme had presented evidence at a medical board meeting. The hospital was forced to contact authorities. The family not only lost custody, but also faced criminal investigation. That case had taught me something crucial. Institutions protect institutions. If I were to report it alone, it would be my word against the Alvarez family. But if I presented evidence in a public forum where the hospital's reputation was at stake, they would be forced to act. I checked the gala details. It started at 7, dinner at 8, presentations and speeches at 9. Donors received updates on the impact of their contributions at 9. My window. 5 minutes guaranteed by a contract I had helped draft 3 years ago, thinking about exactly this moment. Delicious irony. I had built my own platform without even knowing I would need it. I packed appropriate clothing, a simple black dress, low heels, the North Star Fund ID badge I kept hidden. I wasn't going to enter that event as Lucia Navarro, a disposable temporary nurse. I was going to enter as Lucia Navarro, co-founder of the fund that equipped that ICU, a position even Carmen Alvarez would have to respect. On Tuesday morning, I received a message from the supervisor. My contract was being terminated immediately, not Monday as planned. Immediately. A direct request from the Alvarez family. I was to gather my belongings and leave the hospital by noon. I wouldn't even finish my last shift. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. I had lost my justification for being there. No access to the hospital, no contact with the baby, no credibility if I needed to speak. Carmen had cut me off before she even knew I posed a threat. Or she did. Maybe someone had mentioned my questions, my excessive curiosity, my habit of checking across systems. I tidied my closet slowly. Each item I put away felt like a small defeat. A stethoscope that had been with me for 8 years. A colored pen I used to take notes. A photo of my niece that I kept taped to the door. Melissa walked by and asked what had happened. I explained that my contract had been terminated. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't. She lowered her voice and whispered quickly. Carmen had demanded I leave after discovering I'd accessed information about surfactant blocking. Someone at the pharmacy had mentioned our conversation. I felt nausea rise. I was being watched more closely than I'd imagined. I left the hospital at noon, carrying a box of my things. I sat in the car in the parking lot and let reality crush me for a full 5 minutes. I cried. Not the pretty movie kind of cry. An ugly cry of frustration, fear, and anger all mixed together. I had failed. It was going to happen again. A wealthy family was going to manipulate the system, sacrifice an innocent child, and I wouldn't be able to do anything because I was a nobody. A temporary nurse with no power, no voice, no importance. I wiped my face angrily. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Red eyes, smudged mascara, a defeated expression. Then I remembered. The gala was Saturday. I didn't have to be in the hospital to be at the gala. My right to speak came from the North Star Fund, not my employment contract. Carmen could take me out of the ICU. She couldn't take me off the stage I had built. I spent the next 3 days preparing like I'd never prepared for anything in my life. I rehearsed my speech 100 times. I timed it to exactly 4 minutes and 50 seconds. I left a 10-second margin. I organized a simple visual presentation, a timeline of official documents, no opinions, no direct accusations, just facts with date and timestamps that anyone could verify. Wednesday, 1:13:52. Wednesday, 14:17. Wednesday, 15:30. Thursday, 9:03. The story told itself, but the pressure was mounting in ways I couldn't control. On Thursday, I received a call from an unknown number. It was the Alvarez family's lawyer. His tone was polite but threatening. He informed me that any defamation of family members would result in legal action, that disgruntled nurses often made unfounded accusations, that I should carefully consider my future actions if I wanted to continue working in the medical field. I hung up without answering. My hands were shaking. He hadn't mentioned the gala specifically, but he knew. Somehow they knew I was planning something. On Friday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking of all the ways this could go wrong. I could be prevented from speaking. I could be ridiculed. I could be sued later. I could destroy my own career trying to do the right thing. Anxiety gripped my chest like a giant hand crushing ribs. I got up at 3 in the morning and sat in the kitchen in the dark. I thought about my mother. She'd been a janitor all her life. She cleaned offices for rich people who never learned her name. When I told her I wanted to be a nurse, she sold her car to help me with my first tuition. She said I would care for people, that I would matter, that I would be seen. She was wrong about the last part, but she was right about the rest. I cared. I mattered. Even if no one saw. I decided then and there that no matter what happened to me, that baby deserved someone who wouldn't give up. He deserved someone who would burn his own bridge if necessary. I was going to be that person. I arrived at the hotel in Coral Gables at 7:15, 15 minutes after the official start. I wanted the event to be underway when I showed up. There was less chance of being turned away at the entrance. I wore the most elegant black dress I owned. My hair was simply tied back. Minimal makeup. I wanted to look professional, not threatening. I carried a discreet leather briefcase with my dossier and a flash drive with my presentation. A North Star Fund badge hung around my neck, my invisible armor. The hall was exactly what I expected. Huge chandeliers, round tables with expensive floral arrangements, people dressed in clothes that cost more than my 3-month rent. I recognized the Alvarez family immediately. The main table was near the stage. Diego was pale, nervously fiddling with his cell phone. Carmen was beside him, radiant in a red dress, chatting animatedly with the hospital director. I recognized other important faces. The chief of surgery, the chairman of the board, 2 local journalists covering charity events. A perfect audience. I located the event coordinator, an efficient woman with a tablet and headphones. I introduced myself as a representative of the North Star Fund. She checked the list, found my name, and nodded. She said I would speak immediately after the presentation of the new research center, approximately 21:35. She showed me where to wait. I thanked her and positioned myself strategically. I wanted to see the room, see faces, see reactions when it was my turn. Dinner passed in slow motion. Each course seemed to take forever to be served. I made minimal conversation with the people at my table. I told them I worked in a neonatal intensive care unit. They seemed impressed but uninterested. It was better this way. I didn't want attention before it was due. I watched Carmen laugh out loud at something the director said. I saw Diego check his phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes. I imagined him checking updates on his son, on Valeria, on the hearing that would take place in less than 72 hours. At 21, the speeches began, formal thanks, fundraising figures, an institutional video showing the impact of donations. I saw images of the ICU where I worked. I saw incubators our fund had purchased, 3 of them, $52,400 in total. One of those incubators was keeping baby Alvarez alive at that very moment. No one in the room had the slightest idea. Yet. My heart began to race as the research center's presentation ended. Polite applause. The coordinator approached and motioned for me to get ready. I stood up slowly, legs steady even with adrenaline surging through my veins. Years of working under pressure had taught me to function at my limit. I took 3 deep breaths, a technique I used before critical procedures. I grabbed my briefcase. I climbed the side steps of the small stage. Warm lights on my face. Microphone adjusted to the right height. I looked out at the audience, 200 faces watching me with minimal polite interest. Another donor update among so many. I spotted Diego. His expression was confused, as if he were trying to remember where he'd seen me before. I spotted Carmen. She was fiddling with her cell phone, not paying attention. I spotted the hospital director. His polite smile was awaiting quick formalities. I spotted the journalists. One of them had a pen poised over a notebook. I felt something calm inside me, absolute clarity. A coldness I knew well from emergency rooms when seconds can mean the difference between life and death. I began speaking. My voice was firm. My tone was professional. I thanked them for the opportunity. I briefly introduced the North Star Fund. 5 neonatal nurses. A fund created to equip ICUs. 3 hospitals benefited, including this one. Then I completely changed direction. I said that today I wouldn't talk about equipment. I would talk about why we created this fund. about what happens when money interferes with medical decisions, about the baby who was at that moment in the ICU equipped with our incubators, fighting to live while his family fought for control. I saw Carmen lift her head from her cell phone. I saw Diego freeze. I saw the director lose his smile. I kept talking. I opened the folder. I showed the first document, and I began to tell a story they never expected to hear. I projected the timeline onto the screen behind me. Wednesday, 1:52 p.m. I showed the digital consent form. Diego Alvarez's electronic signature authorizing a full stabilization protocol, including administration of pulmonary surfactant, an official hospital system document with an IP address, location, and exact time. I explained in plain language what surfactant was. An essential medication for premature lungs, the difference between life and death for a 27-week-old baby. Diego had authorized it. Doctors had prescribed it. Everything was within protocol. I saw Carmen shift in her chair. She whispered something to the person next to her. I continued. Wednesday, 2:15 p.m. 25 minutes after the father's signature, I showed the pharmacy's administrative log. Supply block. Recorded reason, stock adjustment at the request of the family's legal representative. I paused. Let that sink in. The family's legal representative blocking medication the father had just authorized. I wondered aloud if that didn't seem strange. Complete silence fell in the room. Even the waiters stopped moving. Fast forward. Wednesday, 15:30 p.m., 1 hour and 13 minutes after the lockdown. Carmen Alvarez arrived at the hospital. I recorded every word she said in front of doctors and security guards, complaining that the hospital wasn't providing essential medication, demanding explanations for negligence, threatening lawsuits. I showed her the incident report her supervisor had filled out. Everything was documented. She created a crisis. Then she complained about the crisis. I saw her face drain of color. The red of her dress now a cruel contrast against her pallor. Thursday, 9 o'clock and 3 minutes. Less than 24 hours later. Petition for emergency relief filed with the court. I projected the public document. I read specific excerpts. Allegation of the father's unfitness. Allegation of serious risk to care due to lack of essential medication. Allegation of urgent need for a legal representative capable of ensuring adequate treatment. I stopped. I looked directly at the audience. I slowly explained that the same person who blocked the medication was using this blockage as evidence of negligence to gain custody of the child. The hospital director stood up. He tried to interrupt. He said it was inappropriate, that private family matters shouldn't be discussed in a public forum, that I was overstepping my bounds. I took a deep breath. It was time for the second layer, the revelation I'd been holding back. He calmly explained that North Star Fund had invested $52,400 in that ICU, that the contract signed by the hospital granted us the right to impact oversight, that discovering intentional medical sabotage was exactly the kind of impact we needed to report. Then I revealed the third layer, the one I didn't even expect to find when I started investigating. I showed the corporate structure of Alvarez Medical Supplies. The company was the exclusive supplier of surfactant to that hospital. Controlled by a family trust, Carmen was the trust administrator. She literally controlled the supply of the medication she blocked. More than that, I showed the supply contract, an exclusivity clause. The hospital paid a premium of 32% above market price in exchange for guaranteed availability. Availability that Carmen interrupted. The hospital was paying more for a service she sabotaged. I saw lawyers in the audience picking up phones. I saw journalists writing frantically. I saw board members exchanging alarmed glances. Diego was standing, hands shaking, looking at his sister as if seeing her for the first time. Carmen tried to get up. Her lawyer grabbed her arm. He whispered something urgent. She sat back down, her mask of control cracking live. I ended with the fourth revelation. The final one. The devastating one. Valeria had woken up in the adult ICU that morning. A surprising recovery. Doctors were considering transferring her to a regular room within the next 48 hours. She would be discharged before Tuesday's hearing, a competent mother returning. All of Carmen's legal justification evaporating. And I knew this because I had called the adult ICU an hour before the gala, verified personally. The emergency hearing no longer had any reason to exist. It never had. It was just Carmen trying to take advantage of a window where both parents were vulnerable. I thanked him for his time. I stepped off the stage. The room exploded. 3 months later, I'm sitting in my new office on the 12th floor of the hospital. It's not large, but it has a bay view window and a sign on the door that says Lucia Navarro, Director of Social Responsibility and Care Integrity, a position created specifically after that night. The board of directors needed someone to ensure that outside interference never again compromised medical care. They needed someone who understood both clinical protocols and legal documentation. They needed someone unafraid to confront power. They discovered they already had that person. They just hadn't been paying attention. Carmen Alvarez lost much more than a seat on the board of her family foundation. The investigation my presentation triggered revealed a 10-year pattern of contractual manipulation. She had blocked treatments at other hospitals as well, always in situations where families were disputing custody or inheritance, always using control over medical supplies as a weapon. The state prosecutor's office opened an investigation. 3 families filed lawsuits. Last I heard, she was in a plea bargain trying to avoid criminal charges. She lost control of the family trust. Diego took over management. The first thing he did was break exclusivity contracts and reduce prices to market value. The hospital saved $183,000 in the first quarter. Diego changed in ways that still surprise me today. A week after the gala, he reached out to me. He asked to talk. I expected anger. I found broken gratitude. He said he'd lived his whole life in fear of his sister, never understanding it was fear. He thought it was respect, family loyalty. Carmen had always been older, smarter, more determined. He just followed suit. When Valeria got pregnant, Carmen made it clear she didn't approve. She said Valeria was a gold digger, a fortune hunter. Diego almost ended the relationship under pressure from her. He didn't because for the first time in his life he felt something stronger than fear. Love. Now he was learning to make decisions, to trust his own judgment, to be a real father. The baby was discharged from the hospital 6 weeks later with fully functioning lungs. Diego holds him with growing confidence every day. Valeria recovered completely. It took time, physical therapy, psychological counseling. But she's a warrior, the way I recognize, the way I had to become. We met for coffee last month. She held my hand across the table and said she couldn't thank me enough. I told her she didn't need to thank me. I just did my job. She laughed. She said that was exactly why she was special. For me, it was just work. For her, it was her whole life. We both cried there in Starbucks. 2 different kinds of survivors recognizing each other. The team that worked with me during that critical week received formal recognition. Melissa was promoted to supervisor. The pharmacist who confirmed my suspicions now leads the conflict of interest audit program. We created a new protocol. Any administrative block on prescribed medication must undergo a 3-way review, including an external representative with no ties to the family or hospital. The system I built is spreading. Other hospitals in the network are adopting it. I've been invited to present at a national conference next month. My anxiety still exists. It probably always will. But I've learned to listen to it differently. It's not a weakness. It's an overly sensitive warning system that sometimes saves me. That made me pay attention to details others missed. That kept me vigilant when comfort would have been easier. I go to therapy twice a week now. I have the resources for it. Financial stability for the first time since divorce. I'm no longer a temporary resident. I have roots. I have an apartment with a 2-year lease. I have plants I'm keeping alive. I have friendships that are developing beyond just co-workers. I have a routine that includes morning gym time and bedtime reading. A life that finally feels like mine. I look at the photo on my desk. Baby Alvarez 3 months later. Full cheeks, alert eyes, a small smile. Diego sent it with a note that says, "You taught us that true family protects, not controls. Thank you for showing us the difference." I keep this note in the frame along with a photo of my mother. I've learned that revenge doesn't have to be destructive. It can be constructive. It can be about building better systems. It can be about using your own history to shield others from experiencing the same thing. It can be about transforming pain into action, anger into reform, humiliation into institutional change. The real victory wasn't Carmen losing. It was the baby breathing. It was Diego learning. It was Valeria recovering. It was the system changing. It was my voice finally mattering, not because I shouted louder, but because I had evidence no one could ignore. If you've made it this far in the story, thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that documentation saves lives. That organization is power. That being underestimated can be an advantage if you know how to use it.